Hey everyone, I'm Lee Jen along with Nathan Vashez.
Hello.
And this is Means of Creation, a show where we deep dive into the passion economy and the future of work.
This show is brought to you by Every, a writer collective that's focused on business.
Lately, Twitter has been investing a lot into long form content. They acquired Revue earlier this year, and they also acquired Scroll, which is a subscription service that offers an ad free way to read long form content.
Yeah, and Nick Salon, our guest today, is just the guy at Twitter who basically is responsible for running all of this. Historically, he oversaw relationships with big publishers like the New York Times or Business Insider or any of those. But now, also under his purview, are individual writers who might use Revue or other platforms to sort of, especially obviously Revue, to sort of make a living as an independent creator on the internet that is using Twitter to discover new readers.
Yeah, I think even the fact that his role exists and his purview has expanded to cover independent writers is really indicative of a major shift that's happening in the media landscape. The fact that he formerly worked on US news partnerships and now is just head of long form content partnerships really says something about the fact that that type of content no longer just comes from media organizations.
It is kind of the story of the internet in a nutshell, isn't it? Just like the job title change from like publisher partnerships to like overseeing all writer partnerships.
Totally.
I love the symbolism of that.
Yes. And in this conversation, we talk about how he thinks about Twitter's value proposition to writers, especially in a landscape that is getting increasingly competitive for these types of long form writers. We also talk about Revue's editorial philosophy with respect to moderation and content. We talk about the archetype of who a Twitter native creator is. And their long form content strategy going forward.
I think you're going to love this episode. So why don't we kick it off? Let's get it started.
Nick, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Lee and Nathan. It's such a pleasure to be here. Massive fan of the show, and really excited to chat to you both about some of the things we're working on.
Thank you.
So I wanted to kick it off by first talking about newsletter writers and long form writing on the internet. So obviously in the last couple of years, there's been kind of a flourishing of the craft of newsletter writing and email newsletters as like a new type of content creation that is much more accessible to many more people. And so specifically, I wanted to dig into Revue with you. Why should writers use Revue over any of the other alternatives that exist on the market? How should they think about Revue versus the other options?
Sure, and thanks for the question. I mean, I think it's a really interesting time in the industry, and what we're seeing, particularly on Twitter, is that there is just a really massive appetite for content that goes beyond 280. So we're really seeing a lot of consumer demand on the platform for longer form content, for folks to just dive more deeply into the context around stories, for folks to get very deeply acquainted with niches that they're interested in. So we're seeing a kind of explosion on the market side, on the consumer side. And I think that real interest and desire to consume long form content is really what makes, I think, the Twitter Revue combination so exciting. Because the opportunity, I think, to integrate Revue into Twitter, and for writers to benefit from all the things that we can do around a super deep integration, is really exciting. Not just for writers who are looking to build and grow and monetize audiences, but also for consumers who are just looking for really deep dives on high quality information. And so I think the way I like to think about this, and the way that we're kind of talking around this, is that to kind of divide the jobs that we need to do into jobs that have to be done for readers on Twitter, and jobs that have to be done for writers on Twitter, and both have benefits to the other group or party. And I think that from a perspective of long form content, we see and that writers are already on Twitter, out there tweeting and getting feedback on tweets, writing threads, building large follower group bases based on those threads. And so for us, we see that it's a natural extension for those writers to then move from threads to newsletters and to longer form content. And so if you think about that in the context of kind of Twitter's overall evolution, I mean, 10 years ago, you couldn't even tweet a photo natively, which
Yeah.
is crazy to think. And over time, we've integrated photos for one, but video, 280, and a larger surface to write text, and then threads, which have become really important and popular. And so I think that in the context of Writers for Review, just from a creation perspective alone, the idea of kind of turning the newsletter into almost like a writing funnel, and it being at the kind of end of the writing funnel. You start with a tweet, you test out engagement on that tweet, you see if it's a topic that your audience and community are interested in. Maybe you put a thread out, get some feedback, ask people for their ideas, build that thread, see that that's something that's worth writing about, and then it's a very easy transition, for you to then move into a newsletter. So I think that from a writer experience perspective, just the ease of kind of moving through that process of how you would normally use Twitter anyway, but just doing the newsletter piece, within Twitter, that's really an interesting piece. And then the second thing that I would say, on the reading side, is the integration, really gives writers an opportunity to connect with their audiences that are already on Twitter. And
Mhm.
so, from a reader perspective, if you're a reader and you're hungry for long form content, well, you want to find it in more places. And so that's exactly the opportunity that we're kind of building into. And we're about to release a new feature that enables anybody who is a review newsletter writer to by virtue of writing a review newsletter, they will automatically have a subscribe button that goes on their profile, and that allows for fans of their work, either their followers or non-followers, to click on that subscribe button from within the Twitter app and convert that follower or that person that's interested into a subscriber. And we intend, over time, you can see a world where that button, isn't just limited to the profile page. That's all over Twitter. That's in many different surface areas and discovery
Right.
places. So I think that from an audience perspective, it's really powerful. The idea of being able to build your audience on Twitter, where they already are, frankly.
Totally. I that is so huge, just the fact that you can reduce friction beyond what any other platform can reduce because people are right there. You can integrate it in a bunch of different ways. You could imagine a sort of like Twitter instant article or AMP type product or something like that where it's like it's not trying to take over the web and put it inside Twitter, but just people who already natively want to publish inside Twitter. Maybe there's some better experience. They could get better data potentially, just from having that more integrated experience. That would be great. So is that kind of like the main pitch basically is, first of all, you're already here, you're already writing threads, you're already writing tweets, and then second of all, your audience is already here. They're already reading stuff, and we can reduce the friction to getting the audience to be longer form readers of yours um, in addition to reading your tweets or following your tweets already.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would characterize it more as a product priority.
Mm,
That we really want to. We think writers are so important to Twitter and to the public conversation. Writers of all sorts, journalists, independent writers, writers that are just establishing themselves, writers that are super established. And so, in serving them, we think that the first and most important and most impactful thing that we can do, is help them easily convert their Twitter followers into subscribers. That's something of value. That's a job that's kind of really meaningful to them. So that's kind of where we're focused. I think, with respect to kind of how we're thinking about writers and talking to writers, we're very interested in you know, extending what makes Twitter so special, which is just a world of so many Twitters. I mean, how many Twitters are there? Almost like for everyone has their own Twitter or own collection of Twitters. And you know what
Hmm.
we're seeing is that there are writers on the platform that may not have been writers before they came to Twitter, that may have started with a tweet, that may have started to experiment with threads. You know, I was talking to a writer the other day, you know, and he started last year with 300 followers, and he said, I'm going to do a thread a day for a month. And in a month's time, he had 27,000 followers. You know, he's
Wow.
built a successful business off of that, off Twitter today, but over time, we would like to see him be able to build that business on Twitter. You know, and he's just an emerging writer that we're seeing, you know, is finding their groove, finding their audience, has a penchant for writing, has a passion for writing, and we're really looking to figure out how we can kind of take care of those folks.
That's really interesting. I think of Twitter as like one of the major social media companies that has been around for a long time and sort of came of age in an era in which advertising was the predominant business model for social networks. Um, and to this day, I believe advertising is still the vast majority of Twitter's revenue. And now it seems like there's the addition of other business models, primarily helping to serve creators on the platform, but presumably also helping to like increment Twitter's own revenue in different ways that are beyond advertising. Can you just say more about that, and you know why the exploration of the subscription business model? Are there other business models that you think are compelling to also explore, whether it pertains to creators on Twitter or maybe Twitter itself?
Sure. It's interesting that you ask, and specifically around advertising. Before I moved to the long form content team and the product organization at Twitter, my job was to help news organizations and media companies make money from
Mm-hmm.
monetizing their work via advertising. And we built a really kind of meaningful business, you know, for a large number of, you know, high profile news organizations that were investing in journalism, investing in great content, you know. And I think that the we came away from that, or at least I came away from that with a couple of principles. One, it, the media industry is just changing so rapidly, and it's changing rapidly. You know, for some in a good way, but for others, it's challenging, and they need to find new ways of making money and to diversify their revenue streams. The second thing we came away from was that what's so important is predictability and reliability to media companies and to creators. And so, you know, we made a very clear decision that the way that we wanted to work with media companies was to help them build sustainable businesses on Twitter. And the best way to build sustainable businesses is to think about how folks can diversify their revenue streams. And so when we
Hmm.
think about this, you know, we think about this from the perspective of both media companies and creators and the content creation ecosystem, because it's very important to us to look at it holistically rather than focus on one particular area or another particular area. It's important that there's a healthy content creation ecosystem. And for us, you know, helping folks build sustainable business models means, you know, looking at advertising, looking at building advertising to the best level that you can make it to, but also offering the tools to diversify and to building audiences and to monetizing audiences in different ways. So for us, it's really, you know, about you know, enabling media companies and creators to make a return on what they put into the platform, and to have that return be predictable, sustainable, and part of a diverse, healthy business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Agreed with that. It turns out like even though people desire autonomy and freedom in their work, I think the great thing about having a traditional employment situation was the predictability of your revenues, because your costs are recurring and so your income also kind of needs to be predictable. So I think that is one of the major things that like impedes more people from being creators, is the lack of predictability in revenue.
It's exactly right. And one area that we saw this in, was media companies in the pivot to video era, were being paid huge sums, to move and to create video capabilities, to hire, video editors and video
Hmm.
creators, and that money didn't necessarily sustain, and that was hugely problematic. And so we took the view of rather than going to market and investing heavily in new initiatives, we wanted to build it in a very durable, very sustainable way, because
Yeah.
we didn't want to pull the rug out from anyone,
Right.
further down the line. So that's kind of how we've been thinking about it, I would say.
Totally. I mean, I'm just curious. This is like a maybe a tangent, but in terms of helping publishers, whether individual writers or media companies, drive subscriptions, to me, one of the number one parts of my experience on Twitter that is rough for that is when I am not logged in to a site that I have a subscription to. And then I'm like, I click the link and I'm like, how do is there anything that can be done? I feel like I just speak on behalf of so many people when we're like, how do we stay logged in somehow? Like, is there some collaboration or system that can be built? Or is there something that you're working on? Because I feel like that's such a huge unsolved problem. I know it's a tricky one because, the browser inside Twitter may not necessarily share cookies with the other browser for good reasons, but still, that would be a fascinating thing to solve.
Well, it's funny you should ask, Nathan, because we also see that as a real source of friction,
Yeah.
both in our own everyday use and in the everyday use of users. And I think that for Twitter, it's really important that users can easily and accessibly and in a friction-free way access super quality information. And so another acquisition that was made as part of the Longform group, is an acquisition of a company named Scroll. And
Right.
Scroll's mission is to make the process of clicking on links to publisher websites as clean, as fast loading, as simple an experience as possible. And so scrollers, we're looking at how we're building out Scroll. It will be included in a subscription offering that Twitter's going to be launching later this year. And the real goal is to provide people who click on their favorite publisher links with the best possible experience. Right now, that's an ad-free experience, but you could totally imagine a world in which that experience addresses some of the problems and issues around logins and friction there. So we're thinking about that, and it's something that we really want to solve. The first kind of order of business is getting this kind of overall subscription product launched, and having Scroll included in that. But over time, you're going to see us thinking and talking about many of those things.
Fascinating. And Scroll, the way it works is like you have to install some sort of thing on your phone, right? Is that how it works, or like a browser extension on your laptop? Like, is that the key to kind of like making this work? Is there's a little bit of upfront setup, but then once you get it set up, it's like it just works across a bunch of different websites? Or yeah, how does that kind of work almost from a technical point of view?
In order to bring publishers into the Scroll network. And I think it's worth just kind of moving up a level here, and kind of maybe framing this in the context of kind of the creation ecosystem, from
Hmm.
individuals on one end to organizations on the other. For us, it's really important that both can build sustainable businesses on and off Twitter. We think a quality information ecosystem is absolutely critical. We're troubled by a lot of the changes that are kind of happening in that space, particularly around news organizations, particularly around local news, etc. And so how we're thinking about it is, the way that Scroll will work is that we are looking to enter into partnerships with news organizations that there will be an integration with, and that integration will enable their web pages to load when a member of the Twitter subscription service clicks on that page, to see that experience really cleanly, without ads. And that's kind of how we're
Gotcha.
how we're thinking about it.
Gotcha. Cool.
I want to switch gears a little bit and chat about sort of writer acquisition strategy and kind of the intersection of that with content moderation. So I think one of the most interesting kind of narratives and stories that have come out over the past few months is around the Substack Pro program and how they've been paying out advances to certain writers and kind of hand selecting high profile writers and offering them advances to come on the platform. Um, and a lot of this has come under scrutiny because some of these writers are distasteful to some people, some readers out there, and it sort of like blurs the line between being a platform versus being a publisher when there's advances being involved. Um, I'm curious how you guys think about that, whether you guys will take an active stance on the types of publications and long form writing that you'll support versus not, and what you think of the advances strategy.
It's a great question, and I think a really important question to ask. I think that from a high level, we are really happy and pleased that Substack are building such a great, healthy business, and we want Substack to succeed. We think that they've built an amazing product. We think that they care about their writers, and we think we believe in a healthy ecosystem with lots of players for this writing space. To really flourish, it can't be one or two companies. We have to think about it, in very much of a kind of decentralized, Web3, framework, because we need, writers need a ton of different services and support, across the spectrum. So for us, the more folks that are doing that, the better. I think that how we think specifically about signing up writers is we're very, very interested in what makes Twitter Twitter, and what makes everyone's Twitter the best for them. And that's really a platform that has enabled folks to come to the platform without necessarily having a voice, and having the opportunity to build a voice, and to build a platform, to build an audience, to build a community around their ideas. And we think that is a really important process. And the diversity of voices and the diversity of Twitters that has created, from activism Twitter, all the way through to Twitters that we wouldn't even know of, because they cater to such important, but different niches. And so for us, we're looking at how we can give folks like that the tools they need, to take their writing one step, two steps, three steps further, and to develop them and grow them and help them grow their audience. Because we see on the other side of that equation audiences that are really hungry for that kind of content. So, with respect to how we're thinking about writer acquisition, we're really looking, quite deeply at, the kind of folks on Twitter that are, doing great threads, that are growing quickly, that are building platforms and building audiences, and thinking about how we can support them, how we can help them take their writing to the next level and grow their voices, into bigger voices. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it. We're thinking about it from a kind of diversity of opinions, diversity of voices perspective, and we're thinking about growing it, from these folks that are really building and growing and emerging. I think that there's room for that kind of approach to writer acquisition and many other approaches to writer acquisition, and together holistically, they, when you look at the world 3 years ago, you got a lot more companies focusing on developing writers, and that's got to be a great thing.
I love the strategy of like focusing on people who are organically kind of like emerging on Twitter, who maybe, the traditional gatekeepers, they're not in touch with those people. It's like, I think that's a great opportunity for Twitter. I also think that's an opportunity where having some upfront cash maybe makes the most difference, because if you've got a full-time job and you're just like tweeting every once in a while, but you're already growing a huge audience, and like maybe you write some threads and you would like to spend more time writing, but it's hard to do because it's hard work. It takes a lot of time. Um, Being able to have some sort of advance, especially if it's a little bit less of a risky advance, even though it may look like it on paper, because just how much engagement they're getting, might be a really good strategy. I'm curious if that's something that y'all have considered, or how you think about kind of upfront financing for writers to get started building subscription businesses.
I think it's a really important question, and I think it's a really, we want writers to thrive, and their economic well-being is massively important to us. I think that how we're starting off, we're still quite early in the Revue acquisition, is to really focus our thinking, on one, the product and how the product can help and impact writers, and two, on the kinds of writers that we want to really support, and where we think that there's an opportunity to kind of help writers grow. And I think that on the product side, I've mentioned this kind of profile subscribe button that allows you to effectively, through someone's Twitter profile, subscribe to their Revue newsletter. I think that that's a big deal in some respects, because you're effectively allowing, someone that's built up a Twitter following and encouraging them to take those followers, to encourage those followers to convert into email addresses that you will own in perpetuity. And I think that that's a really important and impactful change that comes with economic value. It may not be as direct economic value, but it's something of value, and I think, and it's something permanent, and I think it's something impactful, and I think as you start to think where that button could be distributed, or displayed on Twitter, the possibilities are endless, and that value becomes kind of really real and tangible.
Totally.
So yeah, so that's kind of how we're thinking about it from a product perspective. From a writer, I prefer the term kind of writer development, because I think what we're really doing is identifying writers in many different niches, and thinking about how they can grow and develop and get a level of human support, frankly, that they may not be used to. At all, reaching out, saying, how can we help? What is your experience? What would make it easier? Thinking about products that allow them to move through that funnel, of tweet to thread, to newsletter, and fully fledged newsletter, to newsletter at a regular cadence, and supporting them there. And so, we've got a lot of plans, to do that. I think the first order of business is identifying those groups, and kind of trying to figure out, where we want to target and focus. But that's the kind of general principle and philosophy. And I think at this point in our development, that those two things are the most impactful things we can do for writers. And I wouldn't rule anything out in the future, but this is kind of where we're focused on right now.
Gotcha. So it sounds like, kind of to start, it's about identifying writers that are emerging on Twitter, getting them started, getting them an email list, which I assume they can export. So that's a really powerful and valuable thing. That's kind of like a little bit more ownership almost over the connection with your audience. And then down the line, maybe anything around financing, or even just focusing on building subscription businesses is like maybe some sort of later step. But for now, really more focused on just getting people writing and subscribing to writers through Revue on Twitter.
Absolutely, and I would add that monetization is key. I mean, Revue, you can sell subscriptions via Revue. We take a lower, comparatively lower cut. And I think that the monetization piece has a really important role to play here. But again, I do think it's worth just underlining that we're very early. There's an absolute huge growth of writers that have audiences and have something different to say.
Mm-hmm.
Society, technology, the conversation around those things are changing at such pace that to stay informed, you need to follow new writers and be connected to new writers. And mostly, we care about building sustainable businesses. And I think there is a risk, when you don't when you're still figuring out how you can best service writers via products that serve them, and how you can service writers, with the kinds of writers that are important to service, there's a risk of not understanding it well enough, and making financial commitments that you may not renew. And to me, that can come with some risk and some cost as well. And so I do understand that there's some immediate upside from that and some immediate support. But I think that if you do move into that model, I think for the sustainability of the model, for the health of the ecosystem, you need to be prepared to commit to that model over a very long period of time, or otherwise you risk incentivizing folks to do something and then pulling the rug out from under them. And I think that is something that one needs to be very, very careful and thoughtful about.
I'd love to probe more into the topic of ownership with you, which you had alluded to with respect to review writers being able to own their email list and being able to port their email list elsewhere and reach those audience members from any other email service provider that they might want to use. And I think like this is such a sea change in the way that social networks have thought about like giving people access to their followers and owning their audience. And I want to hear your thoughts on where that goes. Like, does it go further than just owning your email list? Do you think that, have you guys discussed like being able to allow Twitter users to export all of their followers and be able to reach them wherever? Like, how do you make that trade off between like giving creators ownership, which I think is like the ultimate form of empowerment, versus the defensibility of the product and its network effects?
Yeah, it's such an important issue, and I want to just say that I really have enjoyed and respected your work and your threads on this topic. I think it's bringing
Thanks.
a lot of awareness to how and I think this is broader than just writers. This is about kind of
Yes.
creators, and the creator class, and how their rights are frankly represented, and the work and blood, sweat, and tears that they invest in their craft, what they get back out of it. I would say that my experience, having worked at Twitter for coming up to, well, for over 6 years now, is that there is a tremendous empathy and desire to help and support creators. There always has been, and to help and support folks that invest their time in the platform. I would say that from an ownership perspective specifically, I think we're lucky in insofar as we have this opportunity, quite easily to allow creators to own their email addresses via Revue, and we've built on top of that, the ability for them to convert, interested folks on Twitter or followers into emails, which I think is kind of a first step, but it's a step, not a solution.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I can certainly speak to the ethos, within Twitter of understanding the importance of that, thinking through and understanding the importance of concepts like portability, and how, for creators, to earn livings, that portability is really important. I think we're at the very beginning of this journey. I think that, but yet at the same time we're shipping quickly, and we're moving quickly, and in fact it's an incredibly exciting place to be. But I would say that the most tangible example today is around the email lists. And I think that it's a conversation and an area of exploration that we're going to continue focusing on. From my vantage point, which is the vantage point, I'm lucky enough to focus exclusively on writers, and not to not to think so broadly. I have the luxury of being able to focus. I think from the vantage point of writers, we think it's absolutely essential that writers get to keep the email addresses that they build over the course of their careers.
Would you think about extending I mean, it's tricky because obviously you want Revue to succeed. That's you made a big investment in it, but like if I use some other platform, and I want to be able to use that button on the profile, especially if it's like a one tap button where there's like an API thing that happens where you just send the email address and someone doesn't even have to tap their email address. That's obviously going to be highly desirable from a lot of different corners, no matter what email service provider you use. Is that the kind of thing that you could imagine being open if it feels like it's working, or does it feel like this is a perk of using Revue? We made a big investment in Revue, and we want to drive sort of adoption of it. It's a great tool. We would just want to focus on that.
It's such a good question, and I think an amazing concept that really kind of points towards a more decentralized web, which we're very interested in at Twitter. I saw your tweet, Nathan. I
Uh-huh.
think I liked it. I liked it for sure. I'm not sure if I actually physically liked it,
Yeah.
but
Emotionally liked it.
I
Yeah.
emotionally liked it. Yeah, yeah.
That's the one that counts.
Is
Well,
it?
maybe. Yeah, I'm not sure. Yeah, and I do think, you know, I do think that that is an interesting thing for us to think about. I guess if I zoom out a little bit and think about kind of where we're at in this journey, to me, and I'm curious as to where this is the beginning of a massive sea change. I mean, this is
Yeah.
this shift, in the media business, is the beginning of an enormous shift in the way that information is created and consumed. And I see us at just, opening stage. And now I know that it's been going on for some time, and I know that Twitter has different models historically for supporting and thinking about individuals that contribute and that invest in Twitter. But I think it's very early. So I think it's a model that we will discuss. I know that kind of philosophically, the idea of decentralization is really important. We believe in the health of the overall ecosystem. We believe in lots of service providers out there helping writers, and the more connected and the more that world talks to us, the better that world will be, and the more profitable and the more rewarding it will be for writers. I can't give you any specifics about where we are on it, because frankly I don't know, and frankly I think we're too early, to be kind of developing there, because we've got so much low hanging fruit, specifically around how folks can translate their audiences into email addresses. So that's kind of an honest and picture of where we are at today, I would say.
That makes sense. Um, Another topic I'd love to get your thoughts on is around co creation of media and collaboration between independent creators. It feels like your background is in long form journalism, which was all about like media organizations and people working in teams together in a formal relationship. And now on the internet, we're seeing like this blossoming of a bunch of independent writers building their own independent subscription businesses. And it feels like there's something in the middle, which every obviously plays in, which is a collective of writers who are somewhat pulling together resources and revenue. And it feels like that's an underexplored nascent area of like, what are ways that creators can sort of band together, scale themselves, kind of evade creator burnout, and potentially be able to benefit from other people's expertise and knowledge in a way that isn't so tied to themselves as an individual. So, yeah, I'd be curious how you think about that, because Twitter is inherently, I think there is a lot of collaboration happening. Like the retweet with quote feature is an example of collaborative creation. Threads, like comments at the bottom of threads, are a form of co creation. So, yeah, do you think that also will be addressed through the long form writing features?
It is such a fascinating and multitudinous area, that there are so many possibilities for it. I guess on a personal level, I've been very excited and following quite closely, what's happening on the blockchain side of things, and how the blockchain developments in the blockchain around collaboration, specifically in kind of decentralized apps, and some of the work that's being done there. Ironically, I think that the focus on those kinds of areas, those very far forward areas can take some of the focus away from the nuts and bolts work that needs to be done to enable collaboration between writers. I would say that it's actually happening already quite a lot. We see it happening on Twitter, all the time. How many tweets have you read that says, "Give me an example of the top
Mm-hmm.
five," da, 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 and that
Right.
becomes a newsletter. I mean, that's collaboration, in real effect.
Yeah.
And I think that the tools, how do we enable the tools, to build tools for that?
It's funny to think about collaboration as, like, you can think about it like splitting the proceeds, or having some shared control over something, but then just collaboration in literally the truest sense of, like, we're making something together. Like, even if you respond to a poll question that I ask on Twitter and I talk about the results of that poll in an article, we are collaborating. And it's invisible kind of how much of the, like, sort of the first layer collaboration, which is just collaboration on the ideas themselves or the stories themselves, kind of like comes into play on Twitter, versus the other layers of, like, an economic arrangement, or a control arrangement or something like that.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, there are many levels to this opportunity. I would say, I think a lot of it's already happening. I think that there is a big decoupling that's happening from individuals that are decoupling from media companies going independent, and many are seeking, to recreate the community that they were part of when they worked for an organization. You're seeing lots of examples of that. So collaboration in perhaps more formal terms around, specific collabs. We have just been working with a weather broadcaster and journalist, Eric Holthouse, around a collab idea called Currently, which would allow him to leverage the Revue publisher tool, which gives certain permissions for collaborators, for the owner of the document and the editor, and the writer. It kind of splits up permissions and starts to think about and address those issues. Eric is launching, with 10 plus meteorologists, a collaborative newsletter product that he's doing via Revue, and I think that that's really exciting. So I do think that there's a need for there's not just a need for community, but there's a real benefit and wisdom to being able to source content from communities. I was talking to Mario Gabrielli. I don't know if you know
Oh
Mario,
yeah.
the
Yeah, we
journalist.
do.
He wrote an amazing article around kind of multiplayer
Yeah.
media, and then followed up on that article with a piece about technology industry in Africa, which was a highly collaborative piece, which had 10 plus contributors, and he was coordinating, all of this work and his needs as a writer and an editor and a team leader, far exceeded the technology that he had access to. So I think that, it's a really interesting opportunity. It's something Twitter's thinking very specifically about with regards to writers. It's something that Revue has, a solution that has worked for a few, and that we're looking to build out and to develop. And I think it's a really important model that is going to become increasingly important over time.
Yep.
Do you? I'm curious if on your side are there any specific kind of features on the collaboration side that you think are kind of what would be your top three wish list from a collaboration perspective? From a newsletter product, I'd be curious to know.
Hmm.
For me personally, and then I'd love to hear Nathan's thoughts because he's been building software for this. Um, but in general, as an industry watcher and as a quasi creator myself, I think there is often the like two binary of a line drawn between creators and audiences. And it's actually not that black and white. Like
Yeah.
audience members are helping you create, they're collaborators actually. They're constantly commenting, reacting, giving feedback, replying to the email, giving their thoughts, and that obviously shapes how we create. Um, and so I think like I'm really interested in new models of collaboration and economic systems that can sort of recognize that everyone had a role to play in the success of creation. And I think this is what you alluded to with regards to like what's happening in Web3 models of content creation. Like, I think giving people upside for being a loyal reader and like a viral, like a really great word of mouth reader who has been helping to grow your newsletter just as much as you have. Like, I think that's really interesting. And that's where I see a lot of the future headed.
To kind of jump on that, like I feel like so we've developed our own software to like enable collaboration between different writers where the primary thing we have to do is just figure out, because we're a bundle, when someone signs up we have to figure out how to allocate the revenue. And right now we
Mhm.
do it the simplest possible way, which is we just ask them, hey, where should we allocate your revenue, basically, like what's the primary publication that you signed up in order to read. um, and I have thought about, like, I think for us it makes sense to keep focusing on just this model of like the building the writer collective itself rather than software for writer collectives. But I really wonder what it would look like for, Substack sort of has a multi-publication support thing that's really nascent. I'm not sure what functionality Review has, but there's a lot to be done. Like we are, everything from algorithmically recommending content from within the bundle, which is sort of like this trust bubble, where it's a lot easier for us to recommend anything we've ever published, pretty much for the most part, than it is to if you had to build a recommender algorithm to recommend anything from all across a huge platform like Review or Substack. There's a lot of stuff on there that you may not want to promote, so you'd have to be very careful with that algorithm. But anyway, ideas like that, I just think are really fascinating to think about, if it makes sense to build them into a product like Review where multiple writers could team up. We're certainly doing a lot of thinking on that front, and have built and continue to build a lot of software to support it. But yeah.
Makes total sense. I mean, that functionality does exist within Review, and we have a few folks that are using it. Matt Navarra, has built out a network of writers using kind of the Review framework around collaboration. I would say we're early with it, and it's very nascent. I think to Lee's point around Web3, for me, what I think is really interesting, in addition to the collaboration tools that Web3 kind of promises to enable, is the alignment of incentives and how
Mhm.
you could have a sort of organizational level and layer, which I think that creators, writers, journalists, certainly can benefit from, and in many cases need. You can have a creation layer, where folks have freedom to create, and then there are fan layers, and the notion that everyone can be involved in those economically, and that the incentives and the returns on investment are aligned, is incredibly powerful. I do think that sometimes the excitement of that model, which isn't that far in the future, I mean, certainly companies like Mirror are thinking about these things and building these things out, can take away from some of the, very specific tooling and needs that are required around collaboration, around how can I, write and edit an article with 20 collaborators, in order to get the depth and context that I need. But I think it's a really interesting area, and one that we're super invested in. It's a core part
Yeah.
of our writers' strategy is how to build in collaboration, and how to
Mhm.
think about collabs as a really important group and entity to support.
I would say also, just piggybacking off of that, I think there are interesting things being tried in Web 2 that sort of start to get to that economic alignment angle without using crypto. Like, I
Hmm.
think one of the most interesting experiments within the writing world that I've seen recently was Sari Azut's Ghost Knowledge, which
Mm.
was kind of like this commission slash bounty platform where people could like request that a writer write something and actually put a dollar bounty on that, and other people could piggyback off of that and add their own like patron amounts, so that the writer, if they decided to write this piece, would have like this pool of money already committed to supporting them to do that. And I thought that was so fascinating. And it sort of inverts the typical monetization model of content creators online, which is first you invest time and energy into creating something, hope it succeeds, and then monetize the output. Versus this is like upfront, you know that there is demand for this. And so then you go and create it and you're guaranteed to earn this much. And then it also incentivized people to be thoughtful as to what pieces writers should write, because they also got a percentage of the total dollar amount committed. So I think like that is such a interesting new way to support writing that may be more infrequent, that doesn't warrant a full on subscription.
Hmm.
So like I'm really interested in like what are emerging business models that can suit different types of content and different types of relationships between readers and writers.
Me too. I think it's fascinating, and and maybe to just to kind of bring it into specific topics or communities or areas. You know, everyone has their own favorite Twitter and their own different Twitters. I personally have been spending a lot of time on the kind of business, technology, financial side of Twitter. I think that there's a real kind of sea change happening on the retail investing side, on the financial conversation side. I think that market volatility, is driven a real need for consumers to, get information delivered to them in that way. And I think that the when you think about the I guess the speed and level of change that's happening around information habits.
Hmm.
And you look at that area as one of many, I think, to be completely honest. You can see this moving very, very, very quickly. And the idea of um, writers being closer to their fans, there being some sort of recognition of that closeness, some kind of alignment of incentives, and some kind of ability to get closer, to encourage those relationships to get closer, I think is really, fascinating. It feels like we're at a very exciting time in the industry right now.
Well, speaking of kind of an exciting time in the industry, I'm just curious, like of all the stuff you're working on now, like let's say it all just goes fantastically well, like 5 years in the future, how does that look? Like where are things headed? In an ideal world that you kind of you're working towards.
It's a really interesting question. I'm glad that you're giving me the luxury to think 5 years in the future. Um,
Yeah,
it's not something that I'm thinking about that frequently. We're very focused on kind of how to help writers here and now, and it's
totally.
all hands on deck to support them. I would say that from a high level, I think that a very, very seamless reading and uh, discovery experience if you're a consumer of writing on Twitter. And, be it on Twitter with threads, newsletters, all sorts of different long form media, be it off Twitter, where Twitter can send traffic and point back to the publisher ecosystem, help publishers make money and monetize, the conversation and the interest that they're generating on Twitter. But a really smooth and clean, reading experience, I think, is key. I think a highly integrated writing experience that allows writers to really look at the different formats, be it from tweet formats all the way through to newsletter formats and beyond, very seamlessly, without the constraints, even without the term newsletter, is really about it coming into your inbox. It's really a distribution based term. It's
Right. Yeah.
where does this article end up? You know, thinking about those categorizations, those somewhat technology driven categorizations, and thinking about what a world looks like without them. What would it be like if you received your newsletter in your DMs, or if it was just a notification
Mm.
and it was read? I think
Hmm.
just thinking beyond the inbox is a really interesting space. But I think, to your point, Lee, how do you think about that? But still kind of maintain the values of ownership. And then I think wrapping all of that together, is monetization. And what does a healthy ecosystem look like? I fear that the creator economy is a huge business and opportunity. I fear that the focus on it has two implications. One is that to those that are still searching for a business model that works, it feels like yet another pivot. And pivots, can be good in business, but also can keep you jumping from one thing to the next. And we've seen with publishers, certainly in the video space, that pivoting, it was about building sustainable, businesses. And the second, and this is more relates to the news industry, which is just so critical and core to Twitter's value proposition, to why people come to Twitter, is that a lot of writers, a lot of creators, they secure their information from news organizations that invest tens, hundreds of millions of dollars into news gathering, into having bureaus in far-flung parts of the world, or in cities around the US, even local news organizations as well. And I fear that without thinking about the ecosystem as a whole, without thinking about news as a value chain, with the creator at a very specific end of the value chain, where they are, packaging, distributing, writing, creating and putting out, but also relying on, these facts
Right.
that don't come for free. They come from a very sophisticated and scaled news gathering effort. To me, I just hope that we can nurture and grow this opportunity around writers and creators, but at the same time really ensure that some of the traditional media organizations that do such important work, that they are supported too, and that we think about this as a broader ecosystem. So that's kind of my focus, and that's where my head's at. And if everything's worked in 5 years' time, both will be healthy and vibrant, and we'll have quality information, coming from all sectors, and it will be engaging, and it will address the newest trends in, finance, technology, sports, music, and everyone will be served. Is that too tech utopian?
No, that's perfect.
Love it.
Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah,
It's
thanks
such
so
a
much, Nick,
pleasure.
for joining us.
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed talking and hearing your thoughts on the business too. And I hope we can continue it, maybe over a beer in person at some point.